Hello and welcome to the Anime Advocate, the show about what to watch and what to look for from ADV Films. As the old saying goes, we all have to start from somewhere, whether it's running a multi-million-dollar corporation to hosting a YouTube review show enjoyed by tens of people online. And in the case of ADV Films, the first 18 months of business were crucial in establishing themselves as a credible supplier of anime. In this special episode, I will be looking at 3 titles from ADV's early years that I believe have significant historical value for the company. Their first subtitled release, Devil Hunter Yohko, the award-winning Soul Bianca, and the first set of OVAs they fully dubbed into English, Guy Double Target. Does this trinity of ADV success stories stand the test of time, or are they nothing more than quaint artifacts? Let's find out. During the early 90s, the Western market for Japanese animation was very different from what we see today. Speed Racer was by then a relic, the giant robot craze of the 80s was slowly fading from memory, and the severe drought of titles available to English-speaking fans was sustainable only through the purchasing of Laserdisc imports for upwards of $150. And in this time of desperation, a little company in Houston would rise up to provide an easier, cheaper solution to watch these productions stateside. A collaboration between video game importer John Ledford and anime NASA members Matt Greenfield and David Williams, AD Vision was founded on August 17, 1992, with one simple objective in mind: the acquisition, English translation, and distribution of anime, by fans, for fans. Whilst not the first company of its kind, I think what always made ADV stand out was their commitment to bringing over unconventional titles others would have deemed unmarketable. And the first anime they licensed certainly fit this mould. The debut entry in Toho's multimedia franchise, Devil Hunter Yohko tells the story of Yoko Mano, an everyday high schooler with an eye for the boys, who falls victim to some unusual supernatural activity at her school. Just before she's lured into a trap by demons mindjacking fellow classmate Osamu, Yoko's grandmother bursts in to rescue her, dropping the bombshell that she is in fact the 107th generation of a long line of warriors called Devil Hunters. Having narrowly avoided losing her own powers from the demon's, assault, Yoko is handed down the mantle of 108th generation Devil Hunter by her grandmother, tasked with the protection of humanity against the legions of demonic creatures that haunt Japan. By today's standards, Devil Hunter Yoko's story is fairly typical from what we now know as the magical girl genre, but it's important to consider the time period in which it was localised. It was 1992, and the craze surrounding magical girls wouldn't really take off in the West until DiC's syndicated run of Sailor Moon in 1995. Yoko has all the classic hallmarks of the genre: an everyday schoolgirl, romance, transformation sequences, and battling monsters, but also incorporates suggestive themes and imagery that even future titles in the genre wouldn't come close to matching. ADV was certainly ahead of the curve in this respect. Releasing a magical girl anime at a time when most Western audiences were accustomed to giant robots was a bold risk in itself, but the opportunity to rent one as off-the-wall as Yoko from the video store was an exciting novelty at the time. As Matt Greenfield would explain in the 2002 DVD commentary,
most Japanese animation that had been released over here was giant robot shows, so we felt that Yohko, being a fantasy, being a comedy, and being definitely aimed at a more mature audience, was going to be a very nice counter to all the other kinds of programming that were being brought over.
As for my thoughts on the OVA itself, I believe it holds up reasonably well. Its juggling of sex, slapstick and horror lends it a somewhat uneven tone, but taken as a whole, Devil Hunter Yohko brings about the laughs just as good as it does the devil hunting. The comedic highlight of the film would have to be the generational conflict between Madoka and Sayako Mano. Their belligerent, contrasting guidance of Yoko's sex life acting as a great setup for the complications she faces inheriting her family's sacred duty. A hilarious commentary on abstinence before devil hunting, if you will. Yoko herself, meanwhile, is a very likeable protagonist. Easily distracted whenever a cute boy is on the scene, but her ascension as a devil hunter brings about a strong fighting spirit with a pretty smoking body to match. And while not the most robust in colouring or detail, Madhouse's character animation is well choreographed and features some terrific blink and you'll miss them facial expressions. A well-timed smirk or scowl from a young devil hunter in particular adds a lot of levity during an otherwise brutal showdown between Yoko and Reiko. While I personally enjoy later entries in the franchise for their crazier storylines and improved tonal balance, The first Devil Hunter Yohko is still worth watching, if only to see how far the Western anime scene has come since its release. Honestly though, any praises I could sing for the OVA would be overshadowed by the inspiring story of ADV's localization. All three founders had been eyeing Yohko as their first release very early on, and were fortunate to have discovered its rights belonged to one of the few Japanese conglomerates with an American branch. Despite their enthusiasm for the title, Toho was very reluctant to give the license to such a young, unproven company, but since they couldn't find another US distributor, ADV's offer was ultimately accepted. Working on consumer-grade Amiga computers and watching the film upwards of 40 times to finalise the scripts, Yohko's subtitled release had a remarkably smooth production, with the inaugural VHS tape releasing on December 15th, 1992, just 4 months after the formation of the company. ADV's initial stock of 10,000 copies of Devil Hunter Yohko quickly sold out thanks to positive word of mouth at conventions and in publications like Animag. Taken aback by the success in America, Toho would greenlight additional Yohko OVAs, on top of the 3 they had already developed, with the knowledge they would achieve greater sales abroad than in their native Japan. ADV also saw gold with the property, and eager to please fans craving for more Yohko, would distribute all subsequent entries in the franchise in both subtitled and English-dubbed formats between 1993 and 1997. The first OVA's dub is as rocky an effort as early dubs go, but the actors would significantly improve as the series went on. At the very least, we got soon-to-be legend Amanda Wynn Lee making her breakout role as the titular Yohko, the first of what would be many notable leads she'd voice for the studio.
Wow, bitchin'! It really works! This is so cool!
Having successfully lured in fellow otakus of Devil Hunter Yohko, ADV would settle on a slightly more conventional title for their second release. Space operas were very much still in vogue during the early 90s, with Star Wars and Star Trek continuing to attract huge audiences on TV and home video, so it's no surprise ADV would have wanted to expand their consumer base with an intergalactic epic of their own. In Soul Bianca, a young fugitive named Rim stows away on a space cruiser to escape his home planet of Uno, one of 2 planets under the ruthless dictatorship of Emperor Batros. During its voyage, the cruiser is intercepted and plundered by the Soul Bianca, an advanced vessel commandeered by an all-female crew of space pirates. Inadvertently brought on board with the rest of their loot, Rim coaxes them into travelling to Trez, Uno's twin planet, under the pretext that it holds a prehistoric treasure known as the Genosis. Crew members April, Janny and June accompany Rim to the planet's surface, only to be captured by Batros' soldiers and brought before the deranged Emperor. It is here the young space pirates learn of Rim's true intentions for going to Trez, the attempted rescue of his mother who has been frozen alive alongside other unfortunate maidens. Unable to turn a blind eye to such cruelty, April makes a promise to help Rim save his mother and put an end to Batros' tyrannical reign once and for all. Compared to Devil Hunter Yohko, Soul Bianca is a much more accessible anime for those who may not have appreciated the former's raunchy content. Aside from a few bloody shots and a single gratuitous nipple, the OVA stays very much in PG-13 territory, lending it perhaps a little more class in the eyes of general audiences. But in keeping with ADV's ambition to bring over groundbreaking productions, Soul Bianca is still quite notable in that it featured a mostly feminine ensemble. Anyone familiar with my show may have noticed many of the best ADV titles I've covered just so happen to feature strong female protagonists, something I think the company has always been keen to push if the crew of the Soul Bianca are anything to go by. While they're not terribly complex characters, you get a strong sense of fellowship between them from as early as their opening loot inspection. They ride the moral line pilfering the galaxy, and their personalities are prone to clash, but they all care for each other and maintain a strong sense of justice for those less fortunate. April is particularly great as the Robin Hood of the story, serving as a kindly guardian to Rim who won't let any amount of treasure distract her from fulfilling her promise. On the technical front, Soul Bianca was heralded by AIC veterans Katsuhito Akiyama and Hiroki Hayashi, the former being the senior director of the studio's seminal Bubblegum Crisis series, which Hayashi would later take the reins for its televised remake Tokyo 2040 later in the decade. They have a strong pedigree for directing sci-fi action, and it definitely shines through here. Bianca boasts a variety of exciting set pieces from April, Janny and June's escape from Trez City, with Fed providing orbital sniper fire, to the crew's final assault on Batros' planet-piercing citadel. All of these sequences are brought together with lavish production values, with the big standout being the Soul Bianca itself. It's a masterpiece in mechanical design, matched only by the unusual but memorizing special effects work that accompanies it. There's just something about the way it shoots dancing whip lasers and submerges in and out of hyperspace like a submarine that adds a lot of mystique and elegance to its on-screen presence. Of the 3 titles I've watched for this episode, Soul Bianca would have to be my favourite of the bunch. It's a beautifully animated sci-fi gem with thrilling action, solid characters, and a great sense of fun. Sadly, despite its quality, history was not so kind to Bianca as a franchise. Although it would receive a follow-up in 1992, a planned third installment was cancelled owing to poor sales, leaving several loose ends in the sequel that were never resolved. Pioneer would completely reboot the series with Soul Bianca The Legacy, and while the original OVA would have received an exceptional dub from ADV in 1997, they never saw fit to dub the second volume, despite previously securing it for a subtitled release in 1995. The lack of a dub for the sequel, coupled with undisclosed licensing issues, resulted in ADV never releasing Bianca on DVD. And as of this video, there remains to be a modern re-release for those living outside of Japan. Until Discotech inevitably rescues both OVAs for a shiny new Blu-ray, the only way to own Soul Bianca today is through antiquated VHS tapes or ADV Films' non-remastered, subbed-only DVD. However you decide to watch it though, I highly recommend giving Soul Bianca a look. ADV's acquisition of it as their second title definitely felt like an extension of the olive branch to those who were more casual towards anime, and it seems as though I wasn't alone in that judgment. At the 1993 Anime Expo, Soul Bianca would earn ADV their first major accolades, taking home SPJA Industry Awards for Best Subtitled/Dubbed OAV and Outstanding Subbing/Dubbing Company of 1993. Following another subtitled hit with Battle Angel in late 93, ADV would take the next crucial step in becoming a jack of trades in anime localizing. In February 1994, casting calls would be opened for their first fully dubbed video release, Guy Double Target. I'll be honest, when I first got into collecting ADV titles, I had always been interested in seeing their first dubbing effort and whether it stood up to scrutiny compared to their subsequent library. Surely an anime so integral to jump-starting the Texas voice acting scene as we know it has got to be held in some regard, right? Well, if this interview with Tiffany Grant is anything to go by, you'll probably know the answer to that question.
My first role was Raina in a show called Guy, and I can talk about it because you can't get it anymore. It was Love Body. Lovely.
Let that set the tone for the rest of this review. Much like their first subbed releases, ADV wasn't shy to think outside the box with their first English dub, selecting a title that, for something meant to demonstrate their worth as a dubbing studio, was pretty unorthodox. And by pretty unorthodox I mean they settled on a hentai. Yep, nearly 30 years of amazing voice talent, conventions, and constant online bickering over script changes and performances can all be traced back to this classy exchange from a duo of pornographic OVAs.
Guy, let's get out of here! This whole thing rubs me the wrong way!
The only thing that doesn't is your vibrator.
In Guy Double Target, bounty hunter Guy and his sassy lady friend Raina scour the galaxy in search for the ultimate payout. The first episode, Awakening of the Devil, has Guy and Raina infiltrate the prison planet Geo to resolve the mystery surrounding a secret data card they recovered from a monster-infested space wreck. There they are caught up in a campaign of slavery and abuse by Warden Heel, who has been exploiting the planet's inmates to forge her own little empire. Meanwhile, Dr. Vale, a subterranean researcher of Geo, has been conducting experiments on the planet's mysterious underbelly which has been mutating people into horrific freaks of nature. Teaming up with an old acquaintance named Kara, Guy and Raina must brave the treacherous caverns and prison halls of Geo, defeat Warden Heel, and escape the mutant pandemic which threatens the girls' lives and Guy's humanity. So far you might be thinking this premise doesn't sound too racy, and you'd be half right. Guy very much represents an era when hentai was a little more sparing in providing sad, lonely individuals what they wanted. Most animated smut today is just straight up fucking with the bare minimum of plot to tie it together, but in the 80s and 90s the genre was a little more sophisticated in its content. You either had fantasy game adaptations with a heightened level of eroticism, or ultra-violent thrillers with whatever sex scenes they had being so inconsequential to the main plot they could be easily edited out for a more general release. In the case of Guy, both edited and uncut tapes were initially sold under the ADV branding, but within a year the latter would be re-released under the company's newly formed adult label Soft Cell Pictures, a label which, amazingly, got a revival a few years back. I suppose resurrecting classic branding was far less embarrassing for Mr. Ledford than to go for the obvious joke. Whichever version you watch though, you're not missing out on much with these two OVAs. Awakening of the Devil is a pretty bog-standard sci-fi anime with not a whole lot going for it. The banter between Guy and Raina is entertaining enough, but everything else is just a mishmash of things we've all seen to death in these sorts of titles. And the sex scenes in the uncensored cut? Well, they were just as I expected for this production. Completely unnecessary and uncomfortable to sit through. The only other praise I can really give the first episode is some surprisingly effective monster designs that almost give John Carpenter's The Thing a run for its money. The second episode of Guy, aptly named Second Target, is a lighter, flashier romp, with the plot this time revolving around Guy and Raina attempting to steal a mystical treasure from a pair of royal fundamentalists. The gore and nudity, outside the one thankfully consensual sex scene, is significantly toned down from Awakening of the Devil, with a stronger emphasis on action than bodily horror. Unfortunately, even with improved direction during these sequences, it's a much more forgettable title as a result. The only noteworthy scenes for me were the opening casino shootout and the most bizarre placement of the THX Deep Note. Watching Second Target, you can't help but feel Media Station were attempting to take the series in a cleaner direction. Similar to how ARMS would follow up Mezzo Forte with a TV show that cut down on the original's explicit content. The ending's promise of to be continued at the very least suggests they had a strong desire to produce more Guy adventures, but for reasons unknown, that obviously never came to pass. It's a little sad as, while both OVAs aren't anything great, I think the second episode's more action-oriented premise and the chemistry between Guy and Raina, particularly in the English dub, demonstrated a smidgen of potential for the series to progress into something better. And boy does that make for an appropriate segue, so without further ado, let's discuss dubbing. As the first ADR production ever to be recorded for an anime in the state of Texas, Guy Double Target's English dub is an uneven hodgepodge of one-credit wonders and professionals-to-be who would go on to voice more respected roles. Just from being most familiar with their later careers, Rob Mungle and Tiffany Grant were the obvious standouts to me. They made a fairly good impression considering it was their first gig in voice acting, but there was obviously a lot of room for them to evolve. Tiffany in particular sounds a little awkward during a few scenes, as if the dialogue was embarrassing for her to read out loud.
Hey? Of all the stupid things, what are we going to do now? We're gonna die watching the stars roll by, that's what! We'll never see home again! Oh God, and my library books!
But hey, who am I to judge the first performance of my hero when her character spends the majority of the climax screaming stark naked? Amazingly, both actors must have gotten accustomed to the recording process rather quickly, as I think their performances in Second Target are a big step up from the first episode. They're no contest for future roles in their CVs, but their line deliveries exude a greater sense of confidence, which is especially noticeable whenever Guy and Raina are trying to one-up each other.
Guy, quit fucking around! Why don't you do your trick?
Bitch, why don't you become an honest woman?
What the fuck's that mean?
It means some things are impossible!
Outside of the novelty of it being the first dubbing project undertaken by ADV, I can't really recommend Guy Double Target. Not as a sci-fi anime, or even a hentai if I'm being honest. It's far from the worst thing I've ever seen, but it really only stands as a curiosity piece rather than something worth watching. As I've hopefully illustrated in this video, the first 18 months of AD Vision was a simpler time of building connections with licensors, testing the waters for what titles would sell, and securing the talent that could bring these characters to life in a more accessible language. It was an ambitious undertaking for a young company with so much to prove, but in a little over a year, they were able to achieve what they set out to do, and then some. From 1994 onwards, ADV would expand their catalogue with increasingly frequent VHS releases. From forgettable trash like Samurai Showdown, to more worthwhile projects like Burn Up, Gunsmith Cats, and Golden Boy. Blue Seed would mark the studio's first foray in the distribution of televised anime, and eventually they would make use of their earnings to fund several Japanese productions, beginning with Burn Up W in 1996. Once the new millennium hit and the DVD age was in full swing, ADV Films would reach their pinnacle. Dozens of new titles were hitting shelves each month, 50,000 copies of New Type USA magazine circulated across the country, and Anime Network was broadcasting a treasure trove of their licensed content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By the mid-2000s, ADV was an unstoppable juggernaut, continuing to nourish an industry they helped revitalize in the West all those years ago. For now, at least. I hope you've enjoyed this little trek through ADV's history, and do let me know if you'd like to see more specials like this in the future. Or not. I mean, I've got a few ideas I'd like to produce anyway. Until then, I am the Anime Advocate, and I will see you all next time.